Hello, my name is Angela Simmons. I'm an African Nova Scotian, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a lawyer, entrepreneur, and equity, diversity, and inclusion consultant based in Halifax. Today, we're talking about something essential to strong workplaces and to ethical, human-centered legal practice, creating inclusive environments where people feel seen, valued, and supported. Inclusion isn't just a nice to have, it requires compassion, accountability, and daily growth. When we practice inclusion intentionally, we build trust, strengthen relationships, and create workplaces where people can show up fully. It's one thing to write values on paper, it's another to live them, and how we listen, how we show care, and how we hold ourselves and one another accountable. Let's begin with cultural climate and why it matters. A workplace's cultural climate is the felt experience of the people inside it. It's the difference between saying we value diversity and people actually feeling respected and safe. As an African Nova Scotian and descendant of communities who have lived through dispossession, racism, systemic disparities, and systemic violence, yet continue to show profound resilience, I know how cultural climate affects whether people can show up fully or must protect parts of themselves just to get through the day. A healthy climate shows up in whose voices are invited in, how conflict is handled, how mistakes are repaired, whether people feel they belong or feel pressured to shrink. We're going to share an example with you. When a racialized staff member hesitates to raise a concern because past feedback was dismissed, that silence reflects the climate, not their ability. In healthy climates, insights shaped by lived experiences are met with curiosity, respect, and compassion. Cultural climate isn't about perfection, it's about humanity. It's choosing empathy over ego, connection over comfort, creating workplaces where people can thrive, especially those shaped by lived experience. A broad approach begins with humility, the understanding we will never know everything. Our role is not to be experts in every identity or issue, but to listen with care, learn continuously, and adapt with accountability. Listening means allowing people to tell their story in their own way, suspending assumptions about what is relevant, and being open to feedback without defensiveness. People don't learn when they feel shamed. Accountability comes from calling people in, not out. Learning requires paying attention to emotional cues, pauses, hesitations, as signs of trauma, not as a measure of credibility. It requires self-reflection, noticing our own assumptions and accepting that inclusion is a practice and not a destination. Adapting means acting on what we learn. When someone tells us something is harmful or not working, we respond with care, not justification. Why this matters? People who have experienced racial or systemic inequities were often silenced by systems not built for them. A broad approach ensures we don't repeat that harm. When we listen, learn, and adapt with humility, we create environments where people feel safe to speak their truth. Intersectionality describes how identities, race, gender, disability, class, and sexuality interact to shape lived experience. Kimberlé Crenshaw introduced this lens to show how people experience discrimination in overlapping ways. Her work was informed by DeGraff and Reed versus General Motors, 1976, where Black women argued they faced discrimination specifically as Black women, not just as women or as Black employees. The court refused to recognize their combined experience, highlighting how the law can erase lived realities. In Canada, Raddick versus Henderson Development was an early example of intersectionality applied correctly. The tribunal recognized that discrimination occurred at the intersection of race and disability, not through either identity alone. Ignoring intersectionality in legal settings produces harm. For example, gender initiatives that exclude Black and Indigenous women, cultural training that ignores disability, diversity hiring that overlooks queer and trans people. Intersectionality helps us understand who feels safe, heard, or silenced. When we use this lens, we honor people's humanity, reduce harm, and create workplaces that reflect the dignity and complexity of the communities we serve. Justice is about fairness, but fairness is not achieved by treating everyone the same. Justice recognizes that people's lived experiences are shaped by historical and ongoing systems of colonialism, racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, and other forms of oppression. These forces influence who has access, who is believed, who is supported, and who is left out. Equity is about meeting people where they are and giving them what they need to succeed, not expecting one approach to work for everyone. For legal professionals, this matters deeply. Our field is rooted in precedent, hierarchy, and traditions that were often built without marginalized communities in mind. If we want equitable workplaces and equitable outcomes, we must be willing to question and challenge the structures we inherited. What does equity in practice look like? Understanding that two clients may need different supports, pacing, or communication styles. Rethinking norms like professionalism that can exclude people based on race, disability, culture, or gender expression. Creating transparent criteria for hiring, promotion, and discipline. Building flexibility into policies so individual needs can truly be met. Why this matters. When justice and equity are grounded in the lived realities of the people we serve, we reduce harm, strengthen trust, and create legal workplaces where everyone can contribute fully. Justice is not just a principle, it's a practice shaped by our daily decisions, compassion, and accountability. Decolonization means in legal context, recognizing, challenging, and transforming the colonial systems, assumptions, and power structures that continue to shape our laws, institutions, and client interactions today. This includes honoring Indigenous knowledge and leadership, understanding and acknowledging the legal systems in Canada were built through displacement of Indigenous peoples and forced assimilation, challenging Eurocentric assumptions about communication, conflict, and professionalism, looking at how policies privilege some while marginalizing others, moving beyond land acknowledgements to concrete commitments. Why does decolonization matter for lawyers in the legal profession? Colonial harm continues to shape the justice system, contributing to disproportionate surveillance, discrimination, criminalization, distrust, and barriers for Indigenous, African Nova Scotians, and Black and racialized communities. Lawyers who understand these dynamics avoid reproducing harm and strengthen access to justice. Diversity is about representation. Inclusion is about meaningful participation. Accessibility is about removing barriers so people can engage fully. Why does this matter in the legal profession? Diversity brings people into the room, but without inclusion and accessibility, they may still face microaggressions, exclusionary norms, and systemic barriers. Inclusion determines whether people feel safe to participate, share openly, and trust the legal process. Accessibility ensures people can fully engage, not just physically, but culturally, emotionally, digitally, and procedurally. Legal clients who feel excluded or unsupported may hold back key information, disengage from the process, mistrust legal advice, and experience re-traumatization. Effective legal practice depends on trust, and trust requires environments where clients feel seen, heard, and respected. Diversity without inclusion leads to churn. People enter legal spaces but do not stay or fully participate. Inclusion without accessibility leads to frustration. People are invited in but cannot meaningfully engage. Accessibility without justice or equity becomes superficial. Barriers may be removed, but deeper harms or biases remain unaddressed. JEDDIA reminds us that these elements must work together, and that meaningful legal practice requires respecting and adapting to cultural differences, not expecting clients to adjust to us. Here are some concrete best practices for building an inclusive workplace grounded in the principles of JEDDIA. 1. Build policies that reflect lived experiences. Create or revise policies with the input of staff from diverse identities, and make sure policies consider intersectional realities. 2. Embed accountability. Define expectations clearly. Ensure supervisors have tools to uphold them, and build in regular reviews. 3. Normalize ongoing learning. Offer training, yes, but also create spaces for conversation, reflection, and growth. Reward curiosity and humility. 4. Use restorative relational approaches. When harm occurs, avoid punitive reflexes. Use processes that focus on understanding, repairing, and rebuilding trust, while maintaining boundaries and safety. 5. Reduce gatekeeping. Simplify procedures, clarify criteria, and make advancement transparent. Why this matters? Gatekeeping often affects racialized and marginalized communities most, reinforcing exclusion even when diversity improves. 6. Make inclusion visible. Adjust meeting norms, offer flexible work options, caption videos, create sensory-friendly spaces, and use accessible language. 7. Model the behavior you expect. Leaders influence climate more than any policy ever can. Why this matters for the legal profession? Because effective legal practice depends on trust, safety, and cultural understanding. When lawyers recognize power imbalances, respect cultural differences, and remove barriers to participation, clients share more openly, engage more fully, and receive better support. This leads to stronger representation, fairer outcomes, and a legal system that truly serves diverse communities. Inclusion isn't something we achieve, it's something we practice every day, in every decision, in every interaction. When workplaces commit to justice, equity, decolonization, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, they don't just improve outcomes, they transform relationships. Our goal is simple. Workplaces where people feel seen, supported, and able to thrive, where policies are strong, clear, and fair, where leadership reflects care and accountability, and where we honor the complexity of human lives. Thank you for the work you do, and for your commitment to building workplaces that are not only legally compliant, but deeply humane. The Legal Information Society of Nova Scotia, providing legal information at your fingertips.